Hello and welcome. Today I'm going to be talking about a question that I and Natalie Falero wrote for the last round of the Financial Modeling World Cup on phone bill analysis. I normally do something approximating a full walkthrough of a question. Today I'm not going to do that. I just want to focus on two particular aspects of this one that I found interesting. So what's the idea here? The idea is you've got a bunch of call data, like on the order of 2,500 rows per employee for 10 different employees of uh, of calls they've made, the date, the time, the number they called, where they were calling from, and the duration of the call in minutes. And using that data, this is all for 2022 from the start to the end of the year. And using that data and a bunch of kind of pricing information, you want to figure out which of these vendors would be the most attractive pricing, assuming these are representative employees for your company. Um, and a key part of that is the pricing depends on whether a call is roaming or not, which is a function of whether where you're calling from and the home country of the contract are the same. So in this case, we've got employees in Ireland, in the US, and in Singapore. Then also a function of whether it's domestic or international. And for that, you have to figure out what country you're calling based on the dial code using a table of international dialing codes, which I'll talk more about when I get to that bit, because that's one of the bits I want to focus on. And then according to whether it's peak, off-peak, or weekend. So, the looking up the prices and that kind of thing, and there's some kind of twists. So, one vendor has a cap on the daily or weekly maximum spend on domestic non-roaming calls, and this vendor treats all of the US, Canada, and Mexico, and all of the EU and all of ASEAN as a single country for the purpose of figuring out domestic, international roaming, yada yada. That's not really what I want to talk about. Two things I'm going to talk about. One is thinking about consolidating the data. This is somewhat in the context of competition and somewhat just in the context of if you deal with this kind of problem in real life. And the second one is the interesting kind of question of how do you do a lookup on the international dialing code when these are all lots of different lengths. There's some that are just a single digit, like a +7. There are some that are UK is +44, Ireland is +353, and then +1 is a whole other story that I'll get to when we talk about it. So a couple of things. One is if you flip through the data, you'll see that I have been nicer than I sometimes am, nicer than some of my previous questions, in that the header row is always in the same place and it's always the same set of columns. So that's a simplifying thing. But on the other hand, if you go down through, you'll see that at the top of every month, you've got a few blank rows and then the name of the next month and the word activity, and then the headers repeated. So I'll preface this by saying that consolidating the data onto one tab is not the only way that you can go from here. It's perfectly doable to build the model, build your model over a few columns here and then just copy paste it to each one and copy it down. But what I think of as the sort of industrial strength solution to this is probably to gather the data all into one place, because the initial questions are all just about any one employee and blah blah blah, but then you want to look at patterns across them. You want to be able to pivot, summarize, whatever. It's better to have kind of one big model than 10 small models in that kind of context. So first, I'll just quickly show you what I think of as the kind of enterprise strength solution to this is to consolidate the data with Power Query, and I'll show you how to do that in a second. But just just to be clear that that's not the only option, I will also show you a formula-based approach. So the first thing I'm going to do is just get a list of all the tab names, and as you can see, they're just emp and the number put together. And the reason I'm doing this is I want to figure out what's the most rows we have on any table. I could do this by flipping through all 10, but you want a solution that'll work if there are 20 or that can refresh quickly or whatever. So so here, to figure it out, I'm going to do a count A on this column. I mean, it doesn't really strongly matter which column you do it on. There are some blanks, but I just want an indicative sense of how many. So here it's 2568, and then I want to be able to do that for all 10 of them. And the way to do that is to basically replace this reference with indirect and a string that generates that reference with a variable. So in other words, if I first just wrap all that in a string, indirect of a text string just treats that text string like a reference. So that formula result is now the exact same as before. But the nice thing about the text string is that you can then combine it with other things. So here I'm just going to make that a variable, and now we can see, okay, so none of them is more than 2,671 rows. So what you can do to put them all together is just use VStack and a 3D reference. So VStack, the usual usage of VStack is you can stack whatever this on top of this, stack arrays together. But if you feed vstack a range that goes across multiple sheets, it'll just stack them one over the other. So what's that going to look like? It's going to look like this. We're going to, let's say, drop the header row. Will we drop? No, let's not drop the header row for now. I'll come down to here, and then I'm just going to make this go to 3000 because that should be big enough to catch any of them. And I probably should have made it a 3D reference before editing the other bit, but I can do that piece by hand. So just like you say, from this cell to this cell, you can do from this sheet to this sheet in between quotes, and that gives you a 3D reference. And that, aside from formatting, is basically what you need. Now, as you can see, that's brought in the empties here. It's brought in lots of empty rows at the end because there aren't 3000 rows on each one. But then once you have that, it's pretty simple to wrap up. So we're going to say let whatever D for data be that. Then we're going to filter D on lots of different ways you can do this. This is going to be one of the advantages of Power Query when we talk about it in a second, is more flexible ways to do this. In this case, the data is quite clean. Like every row has every field populated. So one way we can do this is just filter on is the first column a number. And that basically means these labels, and the blanks should go away. And that's it. And then we just need to format this as a date, this as a time, and we're away. And then I guess just repeat the headers. The other thing that you need to do is pull in the employee number and the home country. Now, you could do this with some indirect and other stuff, or you could, well, there's lots of ways you could do this. Or honestly, there's so few, you could just go through and say, okay, Ireland, 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 US, 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 Singapore, Singapore, Singapore. Or you can just say, okay, it's on C3 on every tab, so let's just do it like this. I can get rid of the count A. Actually, no, let's not get rid of the count A. I'll leave that there for a second. So again, first, the easiest way for me to write an indirect is just first point, then wrap it in indirect without changing anything other than putting it in quotes, and then change this. So quote and quote, and then point it at this. And so then we can say employee and home country. And you could be a little more kind of disciplined about this, but one kind of neat way to do it is every employee's data goes from the start of the year to the end of the year. So basically every time the date goes down, that means you've started a new employee. And if you happen to know that text is greater than numbers, then that means this is also the date going down compared to the row above. So what you can say is if this date is less than the previous row date, which can include the header, then I want the next number. So I'm just going to say sum of this and 1. And again, it's because by wrapping this in sum, it'll ignore text and treat it as 0. So that'll give me, otherwise carry on the value from the row above. And that gives me that. And so we can, if I zoom down here to the end of the year, you can see that at the end of December, it resets and we're on to employee 2. And then here we can just xlookup emp, and this in here, lock returning from here, lock. Lock. And you could just do that. It would be slightly more efficient to say if this equals this, then carry over from the previous row, otherwise all that stuff. Because we've got 26,000 rows here. So if you do 26,000 xlookups, xlookups are pretty fast, but it's going to take a little bit longer compared to if you only do a lookup every time you change employee, then you're only doing 10 lookups, and all the rest are just pointing to the previous cell. So anyway, that's the basic setup with formula consolidation. You can, with this approach, handle some additional complexity. In other words, for example, if the headers were not always in the same row, if there were additional columns for some employees that weren't there for others, and you only wanted to pull out these 5, other things like that, but it's significantly more complicated. So instead of just having a simple vstack, you'd have to do a reduce with a custom lambda that tackled each sheet, and then just basically feed reduce a 3D array that was something like basically an anchor cell on each tab. And then it would kind of iterate through an anchor cell on each tab, and you could have a lambda that, given an anchor cell, finds, that column, looks for the word date in that column to figure out where the header row is, matches these 5 names against that, and so on. But like I said, way more complicated. If you have any additional degree of complexity beyond this, definitely go with Power Query. Even if you don't have any further complexity than this, Power Query is probably still a better approach, just because, when you get more data next month, Power Query is just a kind of click button refresh. So anyway, that's one way to do the setup. So then let's flip over to the second way. I'm going to do this a little bit backward. So for this one, I've split the file so that I've got one version with just the assumptions tabs, and then a separate. So this is the PQ consolidation, and then a separate one with just the data. So let's go data, get data from file from Excel workbook, and it's going to be in here. No, wait, sorry, it's not here. It's going to be in videos. Here, data. I'm going to hit import. And like I said, I'm going to do this backwards. So I'm going to do a sort of, here's one I made earlier with an import function, and then I'll show you how I made it. But for now, I'm going to pull in the file, and you'll see it gives me a table of, these are all the sheets, and we've also got the defined names. There's only one, because there's some filter on somewhere in it, then you get this XLNM filter database. I'm only interested in the sheets. And I could, if there were other sheets in there, I could filter this to contains emp, but I've done a file that only has those. And then I've written a custom function, fimport, that will take this table and transform it into the format I want. So, like I said, I'll show you how to write that in a second, but first let's apply it. Guess I'll call it import, and we'll do f_import, and it auto completes, which is nice. Power Query has gotten a lot better at that recently. I'm going to hit OK, and then you'll see for each one of these, it now has a clean table with date, time, number called, call from, duration in minutes, the employee, and the home country. So once we've done that, we can just remove the other columns, expand this. You have the option to use original column name as prefix, but you don't want to do that here. And there we get everything. And then you can just hit close and load, and it'll load all that up. So that's once you have. Sorry, I'm gonna. Oh, never mind. It'll take a minute to load because it's 20,000 rows, and then I'll show you quickly how to make this this import function. Actually, I can just start doing that anyway while that is running. So let's go get data again from file from Excel workbook. So the idea is you want to write a function that will apply to each one of these sheets and do the cleanup. So in other words, the cleanup is, for example, removing these top 5 rows, making these into headers, capturing this country name, capturing this employee, and so on. So what's that going to look like? Basically, the idea is you open up one individual sheet, and in this case, let me just delete until end. So what I did in the import was I selected one sheet to import, but if you just clicked on the file like I did the first time, you can just click on that table. Subtle difference: if you click in here but not on the word table, you get a little preview of what that table looks like. But if you click on the word table, then it gives you this navigation step, so it takes you into that table. Promotes headers, change type. Now, I don't want it to change type. Actually, never mind. And I don't want it to promote headers yet because that's not the right row to use for headers. So now here we just want to remove the top, in this case 5 rows, because the header's in the 6th row. Hit enter. If you need to be more dynamic than that, then you could basically add a custom index, then filter for the word date, which is the header row in the first column, and then determine the row to go to from that. But again, don't have to do that today, so we won't. Then we're going to promote headers, use the first row as headers. Then you can see we've got a few extra columns here. I don't want those. So in this case, I'm only interested in 5 named columns, so I'm going to select those and hit remove other columns. And then I want to add a custom function for this employee 1 and for this home country Ireland. So how do I do that? Well, handy thing to know is that actually, let me pause here. this thing tripped me up because I went to refer to this navigation step. Any of these other steps, if I refer to, remove top rows in a later step, it'll treat that as a table. But this one, for some weird reason, the name here and the actual name are different. So you have to go into the advanced editor to see this. So all the other steps, source here matches source over here, remove top rows here matches remove top rows here, except that it's formatted. So you got the hash and the quotes around it because there are spaces in it. Everything matches except this one. This is hashtag M1 sheet here, but over here it's just called navigation, which is a little unhelpful. But anyway, so now that I have that name, I can come down here, hit add column, custom column, and this will be emp name, emp ID, I guess, or just call it employee. And for that, I'm interested in getting data from emp1 sheet. So for now, I'm just going to say equals emp1 sheet, and then I'll click in here to get the preview, and I can see I'm interested in the value in column 1 and the first value. And the way that you refer to that is square brackets to get the column, and then curly brackets to get the row number. And the one thing that is so confusing for Excel folks is it's a zero-based row number. So this is row 0, row 1, row 2. So put in a 0 there, and then hit enter, and there's employee 1, and then I can do basically the same thing. Again, hit custom column. I want home country. And again, I'm just going to point to that same thing, hashtag emp1 sheet. Hit OK. And then again here, I'm just going to look and see, okay, I want column 3 and I want 0, 1, 2. So come up here, column 3 and 2. And click out of that, and there we go. And so basically all those steps that I've just gone through, that is the custom function that I'd like to build. So how do I turn that into a custom function? First I'm just going to rename this. I'm going to call that TBL because that's a more useful variable name to give. So that's updated the reference here, but also where it refers to it here and where it refers to it here and here. And so now the idea is, instead of doing these first two steps, I just want to provide it a table. So to turn this into a function, you just put in open bracket, close bracket, equal arrow, and then put in what you want. So TBL as table is my input, and then do all this stuff with it. And that's the only thing you have to change. That's the function done. And that is basically what you get if you look at this f import that I used earlier. Oh, I can't edit it while it's dependent thing is being refreshed. So fine, let's just hit close and load. And this presumably has refreshed by now. Yes, it has. It just needs to load in. And then we can quickly look at this and confirm view advanced editor that is basically exactly the same thing. So we skip the top rows, promote the headers, remove other columns, remove I was a little more, actually sorry, I didn't do the removing blank rows in this one, which I should have done. So yeah, my my other function that I wrote on the fly just now did not correctly remove those, but anyway, small correction there, which I would have noticed when I loaded the data up and had empty rows. One of the nice things about Power Query is that you can actually if you have data that's a little bit more delicate, that does not have every single column populated in every single row, then filtering on this column is blank or this column is whatever is actually a bit of a liability, whereas Power Query has relatively easily the ability to say, I mean, it's a mess to read the code, but there's just a simple step, which is you can say home, remove rows, and you can just hit remove blank rows, and then it'll only take it out if it's blank all the way across, as opposed to if you filter on any one column, then you might have something that just happens to be blank in that column, depending on your data source and your data quality and so on, but has values populated elsewhere. All right, this first part took me slightly longer than I planned, so I'm going to hit pause right now because I got to go do something, and then I'll come back and record the second part about the international dates in a little bit. Okay, I'm back. Just quickly check I'm recording again. Yes, all right. So I didn't mean for that first part to take a full 20 minutes or close to that, so I'm going to do the second part a little bit faster. I'm just going to quickly rename this because it's ugly. We'll just call it data. I'll get rid of this one because I made a mess of that anyway, and it's not the one I'm using. All right, so I'll call this data as well. Put it at the end. So The last challenge is to get from the phone numbers here, figure out what country we're in. So I'm going to show you two solutions to this. One kind of takes advantage of the way it's laid out here, and the other is a little bit more general. So what do I mean by the way it's laid out here? So in general, each country has a code. Some share them. So like for example, I think +7 is Russia and also Kazakhstan. I just put in Russia here, but that covers more than one country. But we just have it as one here. With the exception of +1, because +1, as the note here says, covers the US, Canada, and a bunch of countries in the Caribbean. And so the way it was handled for this one was basically we were given a list of area codes within +1, so the next 3 digits that represent, like, okay, 204 is Canadian, 226 is Canadian, 242 is Bahamas, 246 is Barbados, and so on down. And basically the idea was if it's not one of these, then it's the United States. And if you check, you can check something like this, that there are no prefixes in here. So basically for each one of these, we're counting how many times does one start with that. In other words, that followed by star, which is a wildcard for any character. And you'll see that those values, min and, oh, sorry, I've got the United States. Oh, yeah, sorry. So this is a version I've been playing around with before. So oops, my bad. I'm going to get rid of those. I'll add those back for the second version. But the version without the +1 codes, min is 1 and max is 1. So there are no prefixes. So what does that mean? It means that if you look up, the first 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever number of codes, you'll only ever get one match in this table unless it's a +1, and then you go and deal with that scenario. So with that logic, you can write call to something like this. You can say if left of this 2 equals +1, then we're in one world, and otherwise we're in the other world. And I always start writing a formula and then remember something else I want to do. So I'm just going to comment that and just come over and give some names here. So I'm going to say code 1 and country 1, and then this here be code 2 and country 2. So then here I'm going to say if we're in the land of +1, then I want to XLOOKUP. Now I want the start of the number, but keep in mind there are no spaces in here, but in the way that a US number is normally formatted, it's +1 space. And I'm going to do it again, start writing the formula and then stop. Let's just jump down to, to the United States. And you'll see here, this is the kind of standard number format. So you got a space after the +1, and then you got dashes in between. I did consider playing around with the number formats here to make this question even harder, but in the end I just went with the sort of conventional formatting for every country. So, Ireland, it's spaces all the way. The US, it's +1 space and then dashes after 3 and then the next 3 and so on. But anyway, so what that means basically is you're going to need to get rid of some of those special characters. So you can substitute here space to blank. That'll get rid of the space. If you also want to get rid of the dashes, you could wrap it in 2 substitutes, or a nice trick if you want to get rid of multiple sets of characters is you can text split this on a list of delimiters between square brackets. So in this case, I want to get rid of space and I want to get rid of dash. And then you can concat that all back together. And that'll get rid of everything. And then this list can be as big as you want it to be without having to apply multiple functions. And then what I want is the left. So let's say +1 and then 3 digits. So left 5 of that. So I'm going to look that up in code 2, returning from country 2. And if it's not found, then that means it's United States. Because, in other words, I'm in the yes starting with +1 branch of the if, and not found here means it's not one of the codes that identifies it as another country in the +1 region. So that deals with the +1 case, and then the regular case, basically the sort of nuance that we need to deal with is the codes might be of different lengths. But like I said, because there are no prefixes, in other words, +353 means there is no +35 and there's no +3. Because there is a +353. So basically what we can do is take, in fact, I'm going to park this formula again and come over here just so we can spread it out a little. Basically what I want to do is I'll do that same thing of concat text split to get, let me just grab it from here actually, since I have it. concat of text split of all that. What have I done? Sorry, I'm missing the table. Okay. So I concat of text split that. That gives me the number. And then what I want is to take the left of that 2, 3, 4. I think I'm going to have to go as far as 4. Let's do 5 as well, just to be safe. And that gives me the various different kind of starts. And then what I want to do is XLOOKUP those in the lookup is code 1 and the return is country 1. And then you'll see most of them don't match, one of them does. So then what I can do, in this context, I know that there's only one match, so I just say if not found blank, and then I can concat all those together. Because I've checked it's prefix free, there can only be one match, so that gives me the one match. So then I take that, come over here, get rid of the apostrophe at the start, so I have my formula back, and paste it in there, and close bracket. And it'll spin for a second because there are 26,000 rows in this table, but that should work fine. Okay, so that's option 1. But what if we sort of generalize this scenario a little bit more? So in other words, here we're saying, well, +1 is a big blob of lots of different things. I want to be able to break it down into, some +1s are Canada, some +1s are Bahamas, and my default +1 is United States. Maybe I'm particularly interested in clients in the United Kingdom. I'd like to be able to identify these handful of area codes mean London, these handful of area codes mean Edinburgh, Glasgow, southern region, northern region, whatever. And then if it's not any of those, then just default to United Kingdom or whatever. So basically what that would mean is you would have entries in your table containing prefixes. So in other words, you might have +44 for the UK, but you might also have +44785, meaning some particular region of the UK. So that there's kind of different levels of zoom in. How would you handle that? So it's actually quite similar. Except that this concat is now too simple. So we already had something that looked up for different lengths and gave us different matches. So I'm just going to pull that back out, and this time I will remember to add in the table name, which I think is just table data. I'm going to get rid of this because I don't actually want them to turn it into text anymore. But now let's just say, for example, well, actually, sorry, what I need to do now, in this case, the +1s are now just kind of one example of a general case. So I'm going to put all the +1s there. I'm also going to put +1 for United States. And then, I don't know, let's just say, for example, that +35386 is going to be some different area code within Ireland. That's a mobile number, so I don't know. I'll just call it IRMOB because it's not actually a local area code. But that's fine. So now, if I make a couple of tweaks here, I need to give this larger mapping table a name, so I'll call that code 3 and call this country 3. And then if I change this to code 3 and country 3, and then I might also need to add going up to length 6, I think. And you could, generate this with a sequence as well. But so this is what it would look like. So here's the high level match. There's the shortest one that you match is the kind of bigger group, and then the narrower one that you match is the smaller group. So basically the idea is I want to take the last non-error from here. So how do you do that? Well, you can first strip out the errors, and you can do that with 2row. So 2row just takes data and unfurls into a row. If you apply it to a row, it doesn't change anything, but it has a nice little optional argument, which is ignore errors, or you can ignore blanks. But in this case, I'm interested in errors. So I do that, and these are now my only 2 matches. And like I said, I'm interested in the last match because they're sorted by, how many digits have I matched on, and the more digits, the more precision, and I want the highest precision. So then I'm just going to say take from that the last column, so 2 commas, because the first argument is for rows, second one is for columns, -1 gives me the last one. And that's it. Then I can just cut that. I'll put it in the table. And again, it'll take a second because there's 26,000 rows, but not too long. And I'll just call that call to alt. And just quickly double check to make sure I haven't stuffed anything up, that these 2, except for Ireland Mobile, let me just go and get rid of Ireland Mobile because that was fake. And aside from that, these 2 should match. It'll take a second to update because I deleted a row, and that's a little calc intense when you have multiple calculations in 26,000 rows referring to that, but maybe my computer's just in a bad mood with me again. That does sometimes seem to happen. All right, here we are. And I just need to hit refresh, or recalc, I mean, and yep, they all match. So this is the one for kind of that specific case. This is the one for the more general case, where you might want to be able to zoom in on, I'm interested just in London, or I'm interested just in New York City area codes or something like that. All right, that's all I got. Like I said, the rest of it after that is relatively straightforward by comparison. So those are the fun bits. That's all I got. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.